Welcome back to the Parkside Parent Podcast. Thanks for tuning in with us today. I'm Robbie Lacey, the middle school pastor, and it is our mission in students and children's ministries here at Parkside to support families as we help unbelieving students become committed followers of Jesus Christ. Today, we're excited to welcome and have on Sarah Keene, who is a counselor at Fieldstone Counseling, to answer the question, how do I help my kids navigate stress from school?
Sarah, welcome to the Parkside Parent Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is great to have you. How are you doing today?
Good, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, I'm excited to talk with you about an important topic that I think a lot of our parents and students and children can relate to, and that topic is stress. As a youth pastor here at Parkside, one of the things that I think I'm increasingly interacting with more and more is students who are living in a culture of busyness. And we have students and children who I think more than ever are involved in sports that take up their schedule. They have rigorous academic schedules and workloads with homework that just really pile on. And it's a common concern from parents and for children and students that they're just too busy. And something that comes along with that, and as we're going to talk about today, is stress. We have children and students who, with everything that they have going on, when they have too much going on, or even whatever they're dealing with, one of the common responses is stress. So in your work in counseling and in caring for a lot of children and students that are dealing with these very things, two parts to this question. What are some of the most common stressors that you see in children and students? And then how can parents care for their students and children as they're dealing with stress from school, sports, anything that's going on in their lives?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question and something that all of us face as human beings. And then we see our kids facing it also. And I think when you ask what is a common instigator of stress for our teens and our kids, school is at the top of the list for sure. And, I've done a lot of work with kids and teens, and I do a workshop, and I have done before a survey and asking this exact question to teenagers, and always at the top of the list is school. And in fact, so much so that I break up that question to school as in homework or school as in social interactions, and so even though it's broken up into categories, all of those categories are still at the top of the list. Now, in addition to my work with Fieldstone Counseling, I also am a school counselor actually at Lake Center Christian School in Hartville. And so I obviously am a big proponent for school. I think school is a wonderful place to be. I think it's so good for developing all sides of our kids' character. But I see two sides of the same coin, with school, in that there are so many opportunities for our kids to grow spiritually, socially, academically, mentally, physically, in all different ways. But I know that it does produce a lot of stress in our kids. And I think that, in the midst of one school day, our kids are really managing a lot. Not only academics, the brain power and concentration that it takes to learn the things that they're needing to learn, but they're also working through executive functioning skills, organization, time management, all of those kinds of things, which are, there's a big learning curve with that. Even as adults, we struggle with those things. And probably the biggest one really is navigating the social aspect of school. And I think this probably just gets harder and harder the older the kids get. And this is probably what we hear our kids talking about a lot, that their stress comes from navigating social relationships, drama with conflict within friend groups, things like that. So, they're managing a lot. And I think that they are feeling a lot of pressure, and that pressure comes from many different places. Probably as parents, we might ask ourselves, I don't put that kind of pressure on my kids. Like, I don't ever ask them about their grades. I don't care about how they perform in sports or whatever. And sometimes we do as parents. We might not think that we do, but we do. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes the pressure comes from teachers or coaches, from peers, but oftentimes the pressure with our kids comes from within. A lot of us as human beings, and therefore a lot of our kids are hard on ourselves, have high expectations for ourselves. And so a lot of times that stress can be internal as well. So don't necessarily think it's something that you're doing wrong as a parent if you find that your kid is really stressed.
And along with that, I think, so many of those things that are stressors for students aren't necessarily bad things.
Yeah.
Things like school and sports and homework are all things that are actually a benefit to our kids and our students. And it's trying to help them find that delicate balance of how do we not let good things in our life overwhelm us and become ultimate things, or when they eventually do turn into bad things, when they kind of overrun our lives or overrun our hearts. And so that is a very delicate balance, because it's trying to help our kids know how to balance their lives. What are some of your recommendations on striking that balance with helping our kids have a good balance with the good things in their life that do have the tendency to overrun our lives?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think so one thing is to talk about stress, or we might say worry, or having feelings of being overwhelmed, to talk about those types of feelings in from a different perspective, to see the positive side of those kind of emotions. So for example, if I have, like an AP science test coming up and I'm really worked up about it, I'm really stressed, as a parent, instead of saying, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal, I still love you, even, whatever. But instead of saying that, like, man, I can see that you're really concerned about this test. And you know what? That shows me that you really care. Because what is worry other than concern? It may be excessive concern. And like you pointed out, it definitely can go too far and overrun our life. But I think sometimes in the negative emotions that we experience, worry or, stress being one of them, other negative emotions, anger, sadness, fear, there are often righteous roots or holy desires that are wrapped up within those emotions. And so when we are stressed or worried about something, it shows that we care about it. It shows that it's important to us. And so I think affirming that aspect of the emotions with our kids can be really encouraging to them. Like, I think it's so good that you care so much about your friends, that you are so upset that you're having this conflict. I think it's so good that it's so important to you to do your best in your sport. And I can see that because of how nervous you are about your game tonight, And so just affirming that aspect of it within our kids, I think, is a great place to start.
That's really good. Say, a parent sits down with their child and they do come to the conclusion to say, like, hey, you have way too much stuff going on. And this is like, you're stressed out because you're piling too much on yourself. Maybe it's saying, hey, we've been asking too much of you, or you've been expecting too much of yourself. How do you start in a world where I think children, students, and families there's just so many pressures and options available of all the things that you can and should and could be involved with? How do you start to prioritize, or even figuring out how to scale down things as a family as it relates to dealing with stress?
Yeah. So I think that one place to start, I think there's lots of ways to approach it, right? You could write out your kids' weekly schedule, and you could color code each day, like how much time are we spending on studying versus spending time with our family versus your sport versus practicing your instrument versus youth group. You could sometimes having a visual like that, where you're like, man, seriously, like 70% of my time when I'm awake is spent on school. And do I really think school, is that important, and so having a visual like that can be really helpful. You could do something like, okay, let's say you have 30 points of energy every day. and let's look at a day, and how many points are you putting towards school? I mean, how much time or effort or whatever, how many points are you putting towards spending time with the Lord, you know? I mean, and so you only have so much time and energy. And so doing something practical like that can help. I think that one thing that we often leave out in our society is rest. And I've read a lot of research, interestingly, that, you know, kids these days, but I think it's adults as well, don't even know how to rest. Like if you gave your teen or your kid an hour and said, okay, I just want you to chill out, just rest. Well, probably they would go first to their electronics, right? But we know, again, from, you know, neurology, from brain research, that that is not restful. It's actually often overstimulating, screens and technology, things like that. So if you were to do something that was actually restful, would you even know what to do? Would you know what to do? Would you immediately go to a chore or something like that? So do your kids see you doing that? Do they see you sitting down and reading a book for pleasure? Do they see you doing a puzzle, sitting and just having a conversation with your spouse? I mean, do you know in your family what it looks like just to rest? And so you may look at your kid's entire week and there's zero time for that, you know? I mean, and so I think that would be a place to start maybe. And then how do we fit that in? You know, I think that's the challenge, right? Is what do we say no to? What do we say yes to? But sometimes a visual like that, but then thinking of other things that might not be existent at all in your schedule, which could be part of the reason that you feel so overstimulated and overwhelmed.
Yeah. And that makes me think about how much of a discipline it is to commit ourselves to fitting margins into our schedule and setting aside time for rest. And I think that if we just go into cruise control and let the culture or the school or all those things just set the agenda for our family, we won't have rest time built in, and we'll just be packed to the margins. And so this points to the crucial role that parents have of leading their families, and in being a good leader, being willing to set the example in discipline, in being disciplined in order to go, hey, this is as much as we're willing to pack our schedule for the week, but because how much we value rest, this thing that God is a good thing that he's given us that we actually need, as the parent setting the example, in like creating those margins and creating time for that to happen. Right. I think that's hopefully a good segue into kind of the emphasis of this is trying to help parents lead their families well and lead their students well in this. We don't want to just, talk on this podcast just about like, hey, how do you help your kid just manage stress and just kind of keep all these plates spinning without things coming crashing down. But our biggest ultimate priority is for our kids to know, love, and trust Jesus more. Yeah. And actually not in the absence of stress, but actually in the midst of stress and the things that, press in on our lives. Our greatest goal is to see our students let the weight of those things push them to trusting in Jesus more. Do you have any counsel or advice, wisdom on how to really start thinking about that as parents and how we would lead our kids in that way?
Yeah, I think asking your kids if they feel stressed is a great place to start. And then just, I think, embodying to them what we know the Lord does for us, which is that he wants us to come to him with the things that feel overwhelming to us. He wants us to come to him when we're like, I know I'm too busy. I don't know what to do about it. I can't think of what to cut out, or I don't want to cut anything out, or, but one of my favorite verses in scripture is Psalm 62:8. And it says, "Oh, my people, trust in him at all times. Pour out your heart to him. For God is our refuge." So pour out your heart to him. I mean, the idea of that, that it's not I mean, these ideas and tools are good. Make a schedule, you say yes to some things, you say no to others. I mean, that's all good. I think, though, that the reality is we are going to be stressed and overwhelmed sometimes. And, sometimes it's out of our control. And he promises us that in this world we will have trouble, right? Things will be hard and stressful and overwhelming. So when those times come, that he invites us to come to him and tell him how we are feeling, and just to tell him that we feel overwhelmed. And I think as parents, we can embody that to our kids as well. Mm-hmm. When they are feeling overwhelmed, sometimes they just need to dump it all out. And we need to be, good listeners and just good encouragements and supports to them when they do that. And maybe we want to jump to, well, if you didn't spend so much time, this yesterday, then maybe you wouldn't be so behind and overwhelmed. I mean, I think that's a natural place for us to go to, but I think if we can stop ourselves and just listen to how our kids are feeling, that goes a long way.
Amen. And that's been our common refrain with this podcast and with our family ministry at Parkside, is saying we can't lead our families well unless we ourselves are following Jesus.
Right.
And discipleship and being a Christian is ultimately about coming to God with our need, coming to him on our knees, and just asking him for the grace and the mercy and the help and the wisdom that he offers us. And so, like you said, to embody that, to give our kids a daily picture of that, not making parenting about, hey, I'm perfect, I never mess up, so you try your best to be perfect too.
Right.
But to go, we all come with these great needs and this desperate need for Jesus that he can actually satisfy and he can fulfill. So I think that's where we all have to start. None of us do that perfectly. But to fall on our knees before God in constant prayer, regularly modeling repentance and humility for our kids, that's where we've got to start. So, Sarah, thank you so much for your helpful advice. We hope that this is just a good starting point for families as you are stressed out and you have kids who are stressed out, and just seeing the way that those circumstances, those stressors, all those things, you can start conversations with your kids that lead in a helpful direction and then ultimately lead them to Jesus. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And as always, please check out the show notes below for more resources regarding the topic that we covered today. And be sure to tune in next week when Sarah Keene actually returns and helps us answer another question. She'll help us answer the question, how do I talk to my kids about anxiety?